Delegate from Manassas, Delegate Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for a point of personal privilege.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I would like to remind all of you of some words that I believe we should all be familiar with. These words come from the preamble to the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, when that declaration was made in 1776, that promise was not lived up to. When our Constitution was ratified in 1789, that promise was not lived up to. There were exceptions built into our Constitution. Mr. Speaker, African Americans only counted as 3/5 of a person. The vote was restricted to landowners. And even today, we have a legal and judicial system that gives the amount of justice you can afford more often than the amount of justice you deserve. Mr. Speaker, I would like to refer back to the language of that preamble. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Men. In 1776, believe you me, Mr. Speaker, in 1776, women were not considered to be equal. And even today in our Constitution, they still are not. The question of whether or not to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment is one that has been long in the making. And though we've made great strides in equality between the sexes in our codes, we have not yet enshrined that equality into our Constitution. The late Justice Antonin Scalia was asked about equality between the sexes, and he said, and I quote, "Certainly the Constitution does not require discrimination on the basis of sex. The only issue is whether it prohibits it. It does not." I'll say that again, Mr. Speaker. It does not. The text of the Equal Rights Amendment reads, "Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. The Congress shall have the power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article. This amendment shall take effect 2 years after the date of ratification." The fight for the Equal Rights Amendment did not begin when it passed the United States House in 1971, and it did not begin when it passed the Senate in 1972. It began when activists got together to draft the first version of it in 1921. Mr. Speaker, do the math. If we were to pass a resolution ratifying the Equal Rights Amendment this year, it would take effect in 2021, a century after that fight began. Mr. Speaker, the men and women of the United States of America have waited 230 years for our Constitution to guarantee equality among the sexes. It will be 232 years after the ratification of our Constitution when the Equal Rights Amendment goes into effect, if we pass it through this body. But it will be exactly a century after the fight to guarantee that equality began in 1921. Mr. Speaker, I can think of no better time for justice than right now. Ladies and gentlemen of this House, I beg of you, please bring the Equal Rights Amendment to the floor so that we may guarantee equality among the sexes. 232 years is 232 too many. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.